The distant whistle of a train cut through the late afternoon air as Abigail Mason stood alone in the abandoned barn, her heart beating in rhythm with phantom music only she could hear. It was 1878 in Ogden, Utah, and the 24-year-old schoolteacher had been seeking solitude to practice her dancing before the upcoming harvest festival, never expecting that her private rehearsal would lead to an encounter that would change the course of her life forever. Abigail counted under her breath, 1, 2, 3, her worn boots scuffing against the weathered floorboards as she attempted to master the waltz steps her mother had taught her years ago. Her cotton skirt swayed gently with each careful turn, dust motes dancing in the sunlight that streamed through cracks in the old barn walls. She had discovered this abandoned place at the edge of town last spring, and had claimed it as her sanctuary whenever the walls of her small boarding house room felt too confining. Her fingers held her skirts slightly raised while her other arm extended outward, holding an invisible partner. The impropriety of it all, a young, unmarried woman dancing alone, would have scandalized the town matrons, but Abigail didn't care. In 3 days, there would be dancing at the festival, and she refused to embarrass herself by stepping on some gentleman's toes or moving awkwardly when the music began. So focused was she on her footwork that she failed to notice the figure watching from the barn entrance until a deep voice broke through her concentration. "May I?" Abigail gasped, stumbling mid-step as she whirled toward the voice. A tall man stood framed in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the golden afternoon light. His hat was tipped back slightly, revealing a face tanned by the sun and eyes that crinkled at the corners with his smile. He stepped forward, extending his hand in invitation. "Forgive me for startling you, madam," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of someone not native to Utah. "But it seemed a shame for a lady to be dancing alone when I have 2 perfectly good feet to offer." Heat rushed to Abigail's cheeks as embarrassment flooded through her. I was just practicing," she stammered, smoothing her skirts nervously. "The harvest festival is coming and I didn't want to." She stopped herself, realizing she was babbling. The stranger's smile widened. "Name's Jackson Norris," he said, still holding out his hand. "Just arrived in town yesterday. Thought I'd explore a bit before settling in." Abigail hesitated, knowing she should refuse. Proper ladies didn't dance with strangers in abandoned barns, but there was something in his expression and openness, a genuine warmth that made her reconsider. Besides, the barn doors were wide open and the late afternoon sun streamed in. It wasn't as if they were hidden away. "Abigail Mason," she replied finally, placing her hand in his. "I teach at the schoolhouse in town." His hand was warm, calloused from work, and much larger than hers. As he drew her into position, she noticed the faint scent of leather and something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. "Well, Miss Mason," he said, "shall we see if I remember these steps my mother drilled into me years ago?" Without waiting for a response, he began to lead her in a simple waltz, humming a tune under his breath. To Abigail's surprise, Mr. Norris was an excellent dancer. His movements were confident and smooth, guiding her across the floor with effortless grace. Her nervousness began to fade as they found their rhythm together. "You dance very well, Mr. Norris," she remarked after a few minutes. He chuckled, the sound resonating deep in his chest. "My mother would be pleased to hear that." She insisted her sons know how to behave properly in society, despite our ranch upbringing. "You're a rancher?" Abigail asked, curious about this man who had appeared so suddenly in her private sanctuary. "Was," he corrected. "Looking to start fresh here in Ogden. I've purchased some land outside town and plan to raise horses." His eyes met hers, and something in his gaze made her miss a step. And you, Miss Mason, have you been teaching long?" They continued their impromptu dance, as Abigail told him about her 2 years teaching Ogden's children, how she'd come from Colorado after securing the position, and how she enjoyed the growing town despite occasionally missing her family back east. "They've settled in Denver now," she explained as he guided her through a turn. "Father works for the railroad company there." The afternoon light began to soften into evening, and Abigail suddenly realized how long they'd been dancing. She pulled back gently, breaking their connection. "I should be getting back to town, Mr. Norris. Mrs. Hollister, my landlady, will be serving supper soon, and she doesn't appreciate tardiness." Jackson nodded, stepping back respectfully. "Of course. May I escort you back to town, Miss Mason?" Abigail hesitated. Being seen walking with an unfamiliar man would certainly start tongues wagging, but the alternative was walking back alone as dusk approached. "That would be kind, thank you." As they walked the dirt path leading back to Ogden, Abigail found Jackson Norris surprisingly easy to talk to. He told her about his journey from Texas, the war years he rarely mentioned, and his hopes for his new horse breeding venture. "Thoroughbreds mainly," he explained, his enthusiasm evident. "The railroad makes shipping easier now, and there's good money in quality stock." "You seem to have thought it through carefully," Abigail observed. "Had plenty of time to plan," he replied with a slight smile. "Been saving for this chance since the war ended." As they approached the edge of town, Abigail became increasingly aware of curious glances from passers-by. Ogden might be growing with the railroad's expansion, but it still maintained the qualities of a small town, including its love of gossip. "I should continue alone from here," she said quietly when they reached Main Street. "But thank you for the dance lessons, Mr. Norris. You're quite a good teacher." His eyes twinkled with amusement. "Not nearly as good as you, I'd wager, Miss Mason. Perhaps we'll see each other at the Harvest Festival." "Perhaps," she agreed, feeling a flutter of anticipation she hadn't expected. Jackson tipped his hat. "Until then." He turned and headed toward the hotel, leaving Abigail watching his retreating form for a moment before she gathered herself and hurried toward her boarding house. As predicted, Mrs. Hollister had questions the moment Abigail stepped through the door. "There you are, Miss Mason." "I was beginning to worry. And who, may I ask, was that gentleman I saw you walking with?" The older woman's tone was carefully modulated to sound concerned rather than nosy, but Abigail knew better. "Just a new arrival in town, Mrs. Hollister. Mr. Norris is planning to establish a horse breeding operation outside Ogden. We happen to be walking in the same direction." It wasn't a complete lie, Abigail reasoned, just an omission of certain details. Mrs. Hollister hummed, clearly unsatisfied but unwilling to press further. "Well, supper's nearly ready. Best wash up quickly." The next morning, Abigail was distracted as she taught her students. Her thoughts kept drifting to Jackson Norris and their impromptu dance. Several times she had to catch herself mid-lesson when she realized she'd lost her train of thought. "Miss Mason, are you feeling well?" asked 10-year-old Emma Wallace after Abigail had to ask the class to repeat a question. "Quite well, thank you, Emma," Abigail replied with a smile. "Just a bit tired today. Now, who can tell me about the Louisiana Purchase?" At lunchtime, she sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching her students play in the yard while she nibbled at her sandwich. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention, and her heart skipped when she recognized Jackson Norris riding toward the school. He dismounted with easy grace, tying his horse, a magnificent black stallion, to the hitching post before approaching. Several of her students stopped their games to stare curiously at the newcomer. "Good day, Miss Mason," he called, tipping his hat. "Hope I'm not interrupting your school day." Abigail stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "We're at recess, Mr. Norris. What brings you to the schoolhouse?" He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a book. "Found this at the general store and thought of you." He handed her a copy of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. "Shopkeeper mentioned you'd asked if they could order it." Abigail took the book, genuinely surprised and touched. "How thoughtful, Mr. Norris. I've been wanting to read this for ages." "Miss Mason, is this your beau?" piped up little Sarah Johnson, who had wandered over to investigate. "Sarah," Abigail admonished, her cheeks flushing. "Mr. Norris is a new acquaintance in town. Now, please return to your games." The girl skipped away, giggling as Jackson watched with amusement. "Sorry to cause a stir, Miss Mason," he said, though he didn't look particularly sorry. "Children are naturally curious," Abigail replied, clutching the book to her chest. "Thank you for the gift. It was very kind." "My pleasure." He hesitated, then added, "I was wondering if you might consider showing me around Ogden this Saturday morning. Being new to town, I could use a guide." Abigail bit her lip, considering. Saturday morning would be public enough to maintain propriety, and she did have her morning free before festival preparations began in earnest. "I could meet you at 9 by the town square," she offered. "I have commitments in the afternoon for the festival, but I could spare a few hours in the morning." His smile brightened his entire face. "I'll be there at 9 sharp." He glanced at the schoolhouse clock visible through the window. "Looks like recess might be ending. I should let you get back to your students." As he mounted his horse, several boys ran over to admire the stallion. Jackson answered their questions patiently, explaining how he'd raised the horse from a colt back in Texas. "You planning to race him, mister?" asked 12-year-old Thomas Parker. "Not this one," Jackson replied. "He's my working partner, not a racer, but I'll be bringing in some fine racing stock soon enough." After satisfying the boys' curiosity, he tipped his hat once more to Abigail. "Until Saturday, Miss Mason." As he rode away, Abigail called her students back to class, ignoring the speculative looks from the older girls and the teasing whispers. She couldn't deny that she was looking forward to Saturday more than was probably proper. The remainder of the week passed in a blur of teaching and festival preparations. By Saturday morning, Abigail was both nervous and excited as she dressed in her best day dress, a blue cotton with delicate white piping that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her light brown hair into a neat arrangement, allowing a few tendrils to frame her face, and dabbed a tiny amount of rose water at her wrists. Mrs. Hollister raised an eyebrow at Abigail's careful preparations. "My, don't you look lovely this morning. Special plans?" "I'm showing a newcomer around town before helping with the festival decorations," Abigail explained, trying to sound casual. "Would this newcomer be that tall cowboy I've heard mentioned?" Mrs. Hollister inquired, her expression knowing. "The one buying Old Man Peterson's property for horses." News traveled quickly in Ogden. Yes, Mr. Norris asked for a tour of the town. It seemed a neighborly thing to do. "Indeed," Mrs. Hollister agreed with a small smile. "Very neighborly." Abigail arrived at the town square precisely at 9 to find Jackson already waiting, his hat in his hands. He had traded his riding clothes for a clean shirt and waistcoat, though he still wore his distinctive cowboy boots. When he caught sight of her, his face lit up in a way that made Abigail's stomach flutter. "Miss Mason," he greeted, "you look lovely this morning." "Thank you," she replied, pleased despite herself. "Shall we begin our tour?" For the next 2 hours, Abigail showed Jackson the important landmarks of Ogden, the newly expanded train station that had brought such growth to the town, the mercantile where most residents did their shopping, the small but respectable hotel, the church where most of the town gathered on Sundays, and finally, the newly built town hall. "The railroad really changed things here," she explained as they walked along the main street. When the transcontinental line was completed in '69, Ogden became an important junction. The town's nearly doubled in size since then. Jackson nodded. Smart place to settle with all this growth. Good for business. And what exactly brought you to Ogden, Mr. Norris? Surely there are places in Texas suitable for horse breeding, Abigail asked, curiosity getting the better of her. A shadow crossed his face briefly. Needed a fresh start, he said simply. Then, seeming to decide she deserved more of an answer, he added, "Lost my parents during the war. My brother took over the family ranch, but there were complications. Decided it was better to make my own way." There was clearly more to the story, but Abigail didn't press. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred to keep private. She certainly did. "I understand wanting a fresh start," she offered instead. "That's partly why I came to Utah." Their tour eventually led them to a small cafe where they stopped for coffee and fresh-baked cinnamon rolls. As they sat at a table near the window, Abigail became increasingly aware of the glances and whispers from other patrons. By Monday, the entire town would be speculating about their relationship. "People are staring," she murmured, keeping her voice low. Jackson glanced around casually. "Small towns," he said with a slight shrug. "Been the same everywhere I've been. Folks always curious about newcomers." "It's not just you they're curious about," Abigail pointed out. "It's seeing their school teacher sharing coffee with the handsome new rancher." He grinned at her description. "Handsome, am I?" Abigail blushed, realizing her slip. "I simply meant that as though you know perfectly well what I meant." His laughter was warm and genuine. "I do, and I'm teasing you, Miss Mason, but if it makes you uncomfortable, we can cut our tour short." "No," she said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I'm enjoying our morning. Let them talk if they wish." They finished their refreshments and continued the tour, ending at the site where the Harvest Festival would be held the following evening. Workers were already setting up tables and a small wooden platform for the musicians. "This is where we'll be dancing tomorrow," Abigail explained, gesturing to the open area. "The whole town comes out for it. There's food, music, games for the children." "Sounds like a fine time," Jackson commented. "Will you save a dance for me, Miss Mason?" Abigail smiled. "Since you've already proven yourself a capable partner, Mr. Norris, I believe I could manage that." "Just one," he pressed, his eyes twinkling. "We shall see," she replied primly, though her heart raced at the thought. "Now I really must help with the preparations. Thank you for a lovely morning." "The pleasure was mine," he said sincerely. "Until tomorrow evening, then." As she watched him walk away, Abigail realized with a start that she was looking forward to the festival more eagerly than she had in years. The evening of the Harvest Festival arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, and just enough of a cooling breeze to make dancing comfortable. Abigail had spent extra time on her appearance, wearing her best dress, a deep green silk that had been a splurge when she'd first secured her teaching position. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style, with small white flowers woven through the braids. When she arrived at the festival grounds with Mrs. Hollister, the celebration was already in full swing. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between poles, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Children ran between tables laden with food, while adults chatted in groups, many holding cups of cider or something stronger. "My, don't you look beautiful tonight, Abigail," remarked Mrs. Peterson, the mayor's wife. Her eyes held a knowing gleam. "Anyone special you're hoping to impress?" Before Abigail could formulate a response, she felt a presence behind her and turned to find Jackson Norris standing there, looking more handsome than any man had a right to in a formal black suit and crisp white shirt. His usually tousled dark hair was neatly combed, though one rebellious lock still fell across his forehead. "Good evening, ladies," he greeted, nodding respectfully to Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Hollister before his gaze settled on Abigail. "Miss Mason, you look absolutely stunning tonight, Mrs." Peterson's eyebrows rose in interest, while Mrs. Hollister tried unsuccessfully to hide a smile behind her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Norris," Abigail replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You look quite handsome yourself, Mrs." Peterson excused herself with a poorly concealed smirk, pulling Mrs. Hollister along with her, leaving Abigail and Jackson momentarily alone despite being surrounded by townspeople. "I've been looking forward to this all day," Jackson admitted, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Thought the hours would never pass." Something about his earnestness touched Abigail deeply. "I felt the same," she confessed, surprising herself with her honesty. The musicians began tuning their instruments, signaling that dancing would soon begin. Jackson offered his arm. "Would you do me the honor of the first dance, Miss Mason?" She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine fabric. "I would be delighted, Mr. Norris." They took their places with other couples as the musicians struck up a lively reel. Jackson proved as adept at this energetic dance as he had been at the waltz, guiding Abigail through the steps with confidence. His hand at her waist was respectful but warm, and when their eyes met during a turn, Abigail felt a connection that went beyond the physical steps of the dance. When the music ended, they were both slightly breathless, and Abigail was aware of several speculative glances being cast their way. "Perhaps we should take a short break," she suggested. "People are starting to talk." Jackson glanced around, seemingly unconcerned. "Let them. Unless you're bothered by their attention." Abigail considered this. As a schoolteacher, she was held to stricter standards of behavior than most women in town, yet something about Jackson made her willing to risk the gossip. One more dance, she decided. Then perhaps some refreshments. They danced 2 more times before taking a break, by which point it was clear to everyone at the festival that there was something special developing between the schoolteacher and the new rancher. Abigail could feel the weight of stares as Jackson brought her a cup of cider and led her to a bench slightly removed from the main gathering. "I hope I haven't compromised your reputation," he said as they sat down, genuine concern in his voice. Abigail sipped her cider thoughtfully. "In a town like Ogden, merely breathing can start rumors, but I find I don't mind as much as I perhaps should." "That's good to hear," he replied, relief evident in his expression. "Because I'd very much like to call on you properly, Miss Mason. With your permission, of course." Her heart skipped. "You've known me only a few days, Mr. Norris." "Sometimes a few days is all it takes to know you've found something worth pursuing," he said simply. Abigail studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. His open expression revealed no hidden motives, only honest interest. "Very well," she agreed finally. "You may call on me. Mrs. Hollister allows callers on Sunday afternoons and Wednesday evenings." His smile was radiant. "Sunday it is, then." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing, conversation, and shared laughter. When it came time for the last dance, a slow waltz under the stars, Jackson held her closer than was strictly proper. But Abigail found herself leaning into his embrace rather than maintaining a respectable distance. "Thank you for making my first Ogden Harvest Festival so memorable," he murmured as they swayed to the music. "Thank you for offering your hand that day in the barn," she replied softly. "I might still be practicing alone if you hadn't." As the music faded and the festival began to disperse, Jackson walked Abigail and Mrs. Hollister back to their boarding house. At the door, Mrs. Hollister tactfully went inside first, leaving them a moment of semi-privacy on the porch. "Until Sunday," Jackson said, taking Abigail's hand and raising it to his lips. The gentle pressure of his kiss against her knuckles sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the night air. "Until Sunday," she echoed, reluctant to break the connection but knowing she must. "Good night, Mr. Norris, Jackson," he corrected gently. "When we're alone, at least, I'd like to hear my name from your lips." She smiled, feeling daring. "Good night, Jackson. I'll see you on Sunday." As promised, Jackson arrived promptly at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, dressed in his Sunday best and carrying a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. Mrs. Hollister showed him into the parlor where Abigail waited, her heart fluttering with anticipation. "These are for you," he said, presenting the flowers. "Not as beautiful as you, of course, but the best I could find this late in the season." Abigail accepted them with genuine pleasure. "They're lovely, thank you. I'll put them in water right away." Mrs. Hollister provided a vase, and once the flowers were arranged, she discreetly withdrew to the kitchen, though Abigail knew she would remain within earshot as propriety demanded. For the next hour, they talked easily, building on the connection that had begun in that abandoned barn. Jackson told her more about his plans for his horse breeding operation, his eyes lighting up as he described the bloodlines he hoped to develop. "I've already ordered materials to build proper stables," he explained. "The construction crew starts next week. By spring, I should be ready for my first foals." "You've put a great deal of thought into this," Abigail observed. "It's clear this is more than just a business to you." "Horses have always been my passion," he admitted. "Even during the war, when everything else seemed senseless, working with the cavalry mounts gave me purpose." He paused, then added more softly, "They don't judge a man by his past, only by how he treats them in the present." There was something in his tone that hinted at deeper wounds than he'd revealed. Abigail longed to ask, but sensed it was too soon for such confidences. Instead, she shared more about her own journey to Ogden, how she'd trained as a teacher back east. Her family's move to Colorado when her father took a position with the railroad, and her decision to accept the teaching post in Ogden 2 years ago. "It was difficult at first," she admitted. "Being on my own, responsible not just for myself but for the education of the town's children, but I've grown to love it here." "And your family? Do you visit them often in Denver?" A shadow crossed her face. "Not as often as I should. The journey is expensive, and school terms leave little time for extended visits. I haven't been back since Christmas last year." "You must miss them," Jackson observed. "I do," she agreed. "Especially my younger sister Anna. She's 16 now, and writes me the most wonderful letters about her adventures." As their conversation continued, Abigail found herself increasingly drawn to Jackson's combination of strength and gentleness, his evident intelligence and his respectful manner. When Mrs. Hollister eventually returned with tea and cookies, signaling that their private conversation should include her as chaperone, Abigail felt a pang of disappointment. The next few weeks fell into a pleasant pattern. Jackson called on Abigail every Sunday afternoon and Wednesday evening. They attended church together, walked through town on her free afternoons, and occasionally rode in his wagon to view the progress on his ranch property outside town. Always, they maintained proper decorum in public, though their private conversations grew increasingly intimate in terms of shared thoughts and feelings, if not physical closeness. By late October, most of Ogden had accepted that the schoolteacher and the new rancher were courting, and while there were a few raised eyebrows at the speed of their attachment, most viewed it with approval. Jackson had proven himself hardworking and honest in his business dealings, and many parents appreciated the happiness he brought to their children's beloved teacher. One Wednesday evening in early November, Jackson arrived for his usual visit looking particularly serious. After exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Hollister, who again tactfully withdrew to give them some privacy, he sat beside Abigail on the parlor sofa, taking her hands in his. "Abigail," he began, using her given name as he now did when they were relatively alone, "these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you has been a joy I never expected to find when I came to Ogden." Her heart raced at the intensity in his blue eyes. "I feel the same way, Jackson." He took a deep breath. "Before I say what I came here to say tonight, there are things about my past you should know, things I haven't shared with anyone in Ogden." Abigail squeezed his hands encouragingly. "You can tell me anything." "I fought for the Confederacy," he said quietly, watching her face carefully for her reaction. "Not because I believed in their cause. I never owned slaves and neither did my family. But in Texas, when the call came, young men went. It was expected." Abigail nodded slowly. "The war had ended 13 years ago, but its shadows still lingered across the nation. I saw things during those years that haunt me still," he continued. "Did things I'm not proud of. When I came home, everything had changed. My father had died of influenza, my mother from grief shortly after. My older brother James had married and taken over the ranch." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "James's wife, Caroline, she made it clear she had feelings for me, feelings a sister-in-law shouldn't have for her husband's brother. I rejected her, of course, but she told James I had been the one to pursue her." Abigail gasped softly. "How terrible!" "James believed her," Jackson said grimly. "We fought, nearly came to blows. In the end, I couldn't stay. Sold my share of the ranch to him for far less than it was worth, and headed north with only my horse and what I could carry. Worked my way through the territories, saving every penny, planning for the day I could start fresh somewhere far from Texas." He looked at her earnestly. "I came to Ogden because it was growing, because the railroad meant opportunity. I never expected to find you, Abigail. Never expected to fall in love again after closing off my heart for so many years." The word love hung in the air between them. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. "What I'm trying to say," Jackson continued, his voice steadier now, "is that I love you, Abigail Mason. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon by proper standards, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to build a future with you if you'll have me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a modest but beautiful ring with a small diamond flanked by tiny sapphires. "Will you marry me, Abigail? Will you be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children someday?" Tears welled in Abigail's eyes as emotions overwhelmed her. She had known her feelings for Jackson were deep, but hearing him declare his love, seeing the earnest hope in his expression, crystallized her own emotions into certainty. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Jackson, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her alone. Before he could speak again, Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway, her expression making it clear she had heard everything. "Well," the older woman said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, "it seems congratulations are in order." Jackson stood, his arm around Abigail's waist. "Mrs. Hollister, I hope you approve. I know it's been a brief courtship, but my feelings for Abigail are sincere and lasting." "Anyone with eyes can see that, Mr. Norris," Mrs. Hollister replied with a smile. "And anyone who knows Abigail can see she feels the same. You have my blessing, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth a great deal," Abigail assured her, embracing the woman who had been like a surrogate mother to her in Ogden. Later, after Jackson had departed with promises to speak with the minister about setting a date, Abigail sat in her room, admiring the ring on her finger and marveling at how quickly her life had changed. Just over a month ago, she had been a solitary figure practicing dance steps in an abandoned barn. Now she was engaged to be married to a man who made her heart sing. There would be challenges, she knew. Combining her teaching career with the duties of helping Jackson establish his ranch would require careful balancing. The townsfolk might whisper about their rapid courtship, and someday they would need to address the lingering ghosts of Jackson's past. But as she prepared for bed that night, Abigail felt only joy and anticipation for the future they would build together. News of their engagement spread quickly through Ogden. Most reactions were positive, though Abigail did notice a few disapproving glances from some of the more traditional townswomen. The school board called a special meeting to discuss her continued employment after marriage teaching had traditionally been a profession for unmarried women, but ultimately decided that given the difficulty of finding qualified teachers in the territory, they would permit her to continue at least until the end of the school year. Jackson threw himself into preparing their future home with renewed vigor. The main house on his property, while solid, needed considerable work to make it suitable for a family. He hired additional workers, using some of the money he'd been saving for stock to instead ensure the house would be comfortable for his bride. The couple decided on a December wedding, giving them time to prepare, but not requiring a lengthy engagement. Abigail wrote to her family in Denver with the news, receiving enthusiastic responses and promises that they would travel to Ogden for the ceremony. One chilly November afternoon, Jackson arrived at the schoolhouse just as Abigail was dismissing her students for the day. "I have a surprise for you," he announced, his expression boyishly excited. "Can you come with me to the ranch? There's something I want to show you." Curious, Abigail agreed, wrapping her woolen shawl more tightly around her shoulders as they climbed into his wagon. As they rode out of town, Jackson explained that he'd been making special preparations for their future home, beyond the basic renovations. "I want it to be perfect for you," he said, guiding the horses along the rutted road. "A place where you'll be happy, where we can build our life together." When they arrived at the property, Abigail immediately noticed the changes since her last visit. The house, a sturdy two-story structure, had been freshly painted white with green trim. New curtains hung in the windows, and smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. "It looks wonderful," she exclaimed as he helped her down from the wagon. "You've accomplished so much in such a short time." "That's not the surprise," he said, taking her hand. "Come inside." He led her through the front door into a spacious entryway. The interior was still sparse, with only basic furniture, but it was clean and freshly painted. Jackson guided her through to what would be their parlor, where a stunning surprise awaited. In the center of the otherwise empty room stood a beautiful pianoforte, its polished surface gleaming in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Abigail gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Jackson, how did you?" "You mentioned once that you missed playing," he explained, watching her reaction with evident pleasure. "Said your family had a piano in Denver, but you'd had to leave it behind when you came to Ogden. I ordered this from Salt Lake City weeks ago. It just arrived yesterday." Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes as she approached the instrument reverently, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "It's magnificent, but it must have cost a fortune." Jackson shrugged. "Some things are worth more than money. Your happiness is one of them." Overwhelmed, Abigail turned and threw her arms around him, propriety forgotten in the moment of pure emotion. "Thank you. I don't have words to express what this means to me." His arms encircled her waist, holding her close. "You don't need words," he murmured. "Your face says it all." He hesitated, then added softly, "May I kiss you, Abigail? I've been wanting to since that first dance in the barn." She nodded, her heart racing as he lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind if she wished. But she had no such intention. As his lips met hers, gentle at first, then with growing passion, Abigail felt as if everything in her life had been leading to this moment. This man, when they finally parted, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "3 more weeks until you're my wife," he whispered. "It feels like an eternity." "We've waited this long," she reminded him with a smile. "We can wait a little longer," he laughed, releasing her reluctantly. "You're right, as usual. Now will you play something for me? I've been dying to hear you since you mentioned your music." Abigail settled onto the piano bench and began to play, her fingers finding the familiar patterns of a Chopin nocturne she had loved in her youth. The music filled the empty house, transforming it momentarily from a building into a home their home. As the wedding date approached, preparations intensified. Abigail's parents and sister arrived from Denver a week before the ceremony, staying at the hotel in town. Her father, Arthur Mason, was a dignified man with graying temples who clearly adored his eldest daughter. Her mother, Elizabeth, was a warm, practical woman who immediately set about helping with the final wedding arrangements. 16-year-old Anna was a younger version of Abigail, bubbling with excitement about her sister's romance. Arthur Mason took his future son-in-law's measure during a private conversation the day after their arrival. When they returned from their walk, he embraced Abigail with tears in his eyes. "You've chosen well, my dear," he told her. "A good man with a solid head on his shoulders and genuine love in his heart." The wedding took place on a crisp December morning in Ogden's small church, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the occasion. Despite the winter weather, the building was filled to capacity with townspeople who had come to witness their teacher's marriage. Abigail wore a gown of ivory silk that her mother and sister had helped her finish, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had been part of her grandmother's wedding dress. As her father walked her down the aisle toward Jackson, who waited at the altar looking handsome and nervous in his new suit, she felt a surety that transcended the brief time they had known each other. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. When Jackson placed the gold band on her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly, betraying his emotion. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both tender and promising. The celebration afterward at the town hall was joyous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire community twice over. Jackson and Abigail shared the first dance, a waltz that reminded them both of their first meeting. "Happy, Mrs. Norris," Jackson murmured as they moved across the floor. "Completely, Mr. Norris," she replied, her eyes shining with love and happiness. That night, they traveled to their new home as husband and wife. Jackson had arranged for fires to be lit in the main rooms before their arrival, so the house was warm and welcoming when they stepped through the door. With nervous excitement but absolute trust, Abigail followed her husband upstairs to the bedroom that would now be theirs, where they discovered together the final, most intimate expression of their love. Winter passed in a haze of newlywed bliss. Abigail continued teaching while helping to make their house truly a home, adding the touches that transformed the functional spaces into comfortable, inviting rooms. Jackson worked tirelessly on the ranch, constructing stables and fencing paddocks in preparation for the arrival of his first breeding stock in early spring. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes with Abigail playing the piano while Jackson listened appreciatively. They talked of their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. and they learned the rhythm of life as partners, navigating minor disagreements and celebrating small triumphs together. By February, they had settled into a comfortable routine that was disrupted one morning when Abigail awoke feeling unwell. Jackson insisted she stay home from school, sending a message to the school board that she needed a day of rest. "It's probably just a passing illness," she assured him as he prepared to leave for his day's work on the ranch. "I'll be fine by tomorrow." But the next day brought the same symptoms, and the next. After a week of morning sickness, Abigail visited the town doctor, returning home with news that filled them both with wonder and excitement. "We're going to have a baby," she told Jackson that evening, watching his face transform with joy. "In late September or early October, the doctor thinks." Jackson whooped with delight, lifting Abigail and spinning her around gently before setting her down with sudden concern. "Should I not do that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby." Abigail laughed. "I'm with child, not made of glass." "But your concern is sweet." He placed his hand reverently on her still flat abdomen. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. I never thought I could be this happy, Abigail." As winter melted into spring, Abigail's condition became known around town. The school board, now faced with the certainty that they would need a replacement, began advertising for a new teacher to start in the fall. Though Abigail felt some sadness at the thought of leaving her students, her excitement about becoming a mother far outweighed any regret. April brought the arrival of Jackson's first horses, 6 fine mares in foal to a champion stallion from Kentucky, who arrived a week later. The magnificent animal, named Thunderbolt, was the cornerstone of Jackson's breeding program, and his safe arrival marked a significant milestone for their fledgling ranch. Abigail, now showing slightly in her 5th month, delighted in watching Jackson with his horses. He had a way with them that bordered on magical, speaking in low, soothing tones and seeming to understand their needs almost before they did. His gentleness with the animals reaffirmed her certainty that he would be a wonderful father. Summer brought sweltering heat and the final preparations for their baby's arrival. Jackson converted a room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, painting it a soft yellow and building a cradle with his own hands. Abigail's mother sent a package containing baby clothes she had sewn, along with a beautiful quilt made from scraps of fabric from Abigail's childhood dresses. As her due date approached, Abigail found herself increasingly reflective about the swift changes in her life. One evening in early September, she sat on the porch swing Jackson had installed for her, watching the sunset and feeling the baby's movements within her. "Penny for your thoughts," Jackson said, joining her on the swing and placing his arm around her shoulders. "I was just thinking about that day in the barn," she replied, leaning against him. "How differently things might have turned out if you hadn't happened by, or if I'd refused your offer to dance." "I like to think we would have found each other anyway," he said, his hand moving to rest protectively over her rounded belly. "Some things are meant to be, Abigail," she smiled, covering his hand with hers. "I believe you're right, but I'm glad it happened the way it did." There was something so perfect about that moment, you appearing in the doorway, offering your hand. "Best decision I ever made," Jackson murmured, kissing her temple, "though asking you to marry me comes in a close second." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by a sharp pain that made Abigail gasp. "Jackson," she said, clutching his arm, "I think the baby is coming." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain, fear, and ultimately indescribable joy. With the assistance of Mrs. Hollister, who had experience as a midwife, and under the watchful eye of the town doctor who arrived midway through the labor, Abigail gave birth to a healthy baby boy just as dawn was breaking on September 10, 1879. "He's perfect," Jackson whispered in awe as he held his son for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Arthur Jackson Norris after both Abigail's father and his own. Little AJ, as they came to call him, had his father's dark hair and his mother's bright blue eyes. From his first days, it was clear he had inherited his father's strong will and his mother's inquisitive nature. The first year of Aj's life passed in a whirlwind of sleepless nights, first smiles, and countless tiny milestones that his parents celebrated with the enthusiasm of all new parents. The horse breeding business began to thrive, with Thunderbolt's first crop of foals showing exceptional promise. Word of the quality of Norris stock spread, bringing buyers from as far away as California and back east. Abigail, while devoted to her son, found she missed the intellectual stimulation of teaching. When AJ was 18 months old, she began tutoring a few students from town who needed extra help, bringing them to the ranch several afternoons a week. This arrangement allowed her to keep her hand in education while remaining primarily focused on her family. By the time AJ was 3, the Norris Ranch had expanded significantly. They had hired several hands to help with the growing number of horses, built additional stables, and added a training ring where Jackson worked with the young stock. Their home had been enlarged as well, with a new wing that included a dedicated music room for Abigail's piano and a small library where she conducted her tutoring sessions. In the spring of 1883, Abigail discovered she was expecting their second child. The pregnancy was easier than her first, and on a snowy December evening, she gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Anna, after both her mother and sister. Unlike her brother, little Beth had Abigail's light brown hair and Jackson's deep blue eyes. With 2 small children and a thriving ranch, life was busy and fulfilling for the Norris family. Yet they always made time for each other, continuing the tradition of dancing together in their parlor after the children were asleep, remembering where their love story had begun. As the years passed, more children joined their family, twins James and Joseph in 1886, and finally, to everyone's surprise, another daughter, Margaret, in 1890 when Abigail was 36. Their house rang with laughter, occasional tears, and the constant movement of a large, loving family. The ranch prospered beyond Jackson's initial dreams. Norris thoroughbreds became known throughout the West for quality and excellent bloodlines. AJ showed his father's affinity for horses from an early age, following Jackson around the stables from the time he could walk and declaring at age 10 that he would someday take over the business. Beth inherited her mother's love of learning and music, spending hours at the piano or with her nose in a book. The twins were a whirlwind of energy and mischief, but showed a remarkable talent for working with the more difficult horses. And little Maggie, the baby of the family, wrapped everyone around her finger with her sunny disposition and determined spirit. Through it all, Jackson and Abigail's love deepened and matured, weathering the inevitable storms of life with the strength they found in each other. When Arthur Mason passed away in 1891, followed by Elizabeth a year later, Abigail found solace in Jackson's steady presence and unwavering support. When drought threatened the ranch in the harsh summer of 1893, Abigail's practical nature and optimism helped Jackson navigate the difficult decisions needed to preserve their livelihood. In 1898, as they prepared to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Abigail by converting one of the old outbuildings into a proper schoolhouse, where she could expand her tutoring into a small private school for ranch children and others from surrounding properties who found the journey to Ogden's school too difficult. "You've given up so much for me and the children," he told her as he showed her the finished building, complete with desks, blackboards, and bookshelves. "I wanted you to have a place where you could share your love of learning again on your own terms." Tears filled Abigail's eyes as she explored the schoolroom. "You've never asked me to give up anything, Jackson. Everything I've done has been my choice because I love you and our family." "I know," he said, taking her hands in his, "but I also know how much teaching means to you. This is my way of saying thank you for these 20 years, for our beautiful children, for making every day better just by being in it." The Norris School, as it came to be known, quickly gained a reputation for excellence under Abigail's direction. By the turn of the century, families were sending children from as far as Salt Lake City to board with the Norrises during the school year, drawn by Abigail's progressive teaching methods and Jackson's equestrian instruction. Life wasn't without its challenges. In 1902, at the age of 23, AJ announced his intention to marry Sarah Johnson, the same little girl who had once asked Abigail if Jackson was her beau. While they were happy for their son, both Jackson and Abigail privately worried that he was too young to settle down. Their concerns proved unfounded, however, as AJ and Sarah built a solid partnership that mirrored his parents in many ways. The same year, Beth left for college in Boston, the first Norris to seek higher education. Her departure left an emptiness in the house that took months to adjust to, though her letters home, full of excitement about her studies and new experiences, brought joy to the entire family. In 1905, as Abigail approached her 51st birthday, she stood on the porch of their home, watching Jackson work with a spirited 3-year-old colt in the training ring. Though his hair was now more silver than black, and the years of physical labor had left their mark on his body, he moved with the same grace that had first caught her attention all those years ago in the abandoned barn. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and smiled, that same smile that still made her heart skip after 27 years of marriage. He said something to one of the ranch hands, then walked toward the house, removing his gloves as he approached, admiring the view. He teased as he climbed the porch steps. "Always," she replied with a smile. "You still move like that young cowboy who offered me his hand to dance." Jackson laughed, pulling her into his arms. "And you're still as beautiful as the schoolteacher who took it." He brushed a strand of hair, now streaked with silver, back from her face. "Do you ever regret it, taking my hand that day?" Abigail looked past him to the thriving ranch. They had built together the main house, now expanded to accommodate their growing family. The stables housing some of the finest horses in the territory. The schoolhouse, where she continued to shape young minds. She thought of their children, AJ, now managing much of the ranch operations while he and Sarah raised their own children in a house they had built on the northern edge of the property. Beth, teaching at a women's college in Massachusetts. The twins, who had recently returned from studying veterinary medicine to join the family business. And Maggie, 15 and already showing signs of combining her father's business acumen with her mother's intellectual curiosity. "Not for a single moment," she answered honestly. "Every step of this dance has been exactly right." Jackson smiled, humming a familiar waltz tune as he took her hand and led her into an impromptu dance on the porch, just as he had that first afternoon. As they moved together in the golden light of the setting sun, Abigail thought of all the twists and turns their life together had taken, all the joy and sorrow they had shared, all the love that had grown from that simple offered hand. And she knew with absolute certainty that some things truly were meant to be. In the years that followed, the Norris family continued to flourish. The ranch expanded further, with AJ taking over more of the day-to-day operations while Jackson focused on breeding decisions and the business aspects. The Norris School gained such renown that Abigail had to turn away applicants, limited by the size of their facilities and her desire to provide personalized attention to each student. The twins, James and Joseph, established a veterinary practice that served not just the Norris Ranch but surrounding properties as well. Their expertise particularly valued when a mysterious equine illness swept through the territory in 1908. Their quick diagnosis and treatment protocols saved countless valuable animals and further enhanced the Norris reputation. Beth married a fellow educator she had met in Boston, and while they settled in Massachusetts, they made regular trips west with their children, ensuring that the extended family remained close despite the distance. Maggie, to everyone's surprise, developed a keen interest in the emerging automobile industry, eventually convincing her father to invest in a garage in Ogden that she managed with remarkable skill for a woman of her era. As they entered their 60s, Jackson and Abigail began to step back from daily responsibilities, though neither could imagine fully retiring. They traveled occasionally to visit Beth in Massachusetts, to horse auctions in Kentucky, once even to Europe to study breeding practices there, but always returned to the ranch that had been the center of their lives for so long. In 1916, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a grand party that brought together family, friends, and the community that had watched their love story unfold. 5 generations of Norrises gathered on the ranch, from Jackson and Abigail down to Ad's first grandchild, a lively toddler named Jackson Arthur, who showed the same affinity for horses as his grandfather and father. During the celebration, one of their former students, now the mayor of Ogden, proposed a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "To Jackson and Abigail Norris," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us all what it means to build a life on love, hard work, and faith in each other. Their partnership has been a beacon in our community for 4 decades, and the fruits of their labor, their children, their students, their horses, and the example they've set, will continue to enrich our lives for generations to come." Later that evening, as the party wound down and younger family members took over hosting duties, Jackson found Abigail sitting on their porch swing, watching the sunset just as she had done countless times over the years. "May I join you?" he asked, the familiar phrase carrying echoes of their first meeting. She smiled up at him, her face lined with age but her eyes still bright with the same intelligence and warmth that had first drawn him to her. "Always," she replied, patting the space beside her. As they sat together, his arm around her shoulders just as it had been for 40 years, Abigail reflected on the dance they had shared, not just that first waltz in an abandoned barn, but the intricate, beautiful dance of their life together. Every step, every turn, every dip and sway had led them here, to this moment of contentment and fulfillment that neither could have imagined when they were young. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Jackson asked, his voice lower and rougher with age but still holding the same tenderness when he spoke to her. "I was thinking about dancing," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "About how life is like a dance. Sometimes we lead, sometimes we follow, but always we move together." Jackson nodded, understanding as he always did. "The best dance I ever had," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And it all started because a beautiful schoolteacher was practicing her steps alone in a barn. And a handsome cowboy was brave enough to offer his hand," Abigail added with a smile. As twilight deepened into evening and stars began to appear in the vast Utah sky, they remained on the porch, Two figures silhouetted against the soft light from their home, still dancing, still in perfect step, still moving forward together as they had from the very beginning. The legacy of Jackson and Abigail Norris lived on long after they were gone. The ranch they had built from nothing became one of the premier horse breeding operations in the American West. The school Abigail founded eventually grew into a respected academy that emphasized both academic excellence and practical skills. But perhaps their greatest legacy was less tangible: the example they set of a partnership based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and enduring love. And in the family stories passed down through generations, one tale was told more often than any other: how a young schoolteacher practicing dance steps alone in an abandoned barn had been interrupted by a cowboy with an outstretched hand and a simple question, "May I?" And how that moment had begun a dance that lasted a lifetime.